Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This is the third and the last in the little arc that I'm doing of compressors. We started with the simple but somewhat brutal audio damages Rough Rider. Then we went completely in the opposite direction, which is the very kind, serene TDR Kotelnikov, and to show something in the middle. Now, what I will refer to as a real character compressor, not like Rough Rider isn't actually a character compressor, but a real character compressor, something that's far more complex. And again, I've actually ended up with a TDR product, not because I'm pushing them in any specific way, but they're Molot. In this particular situation, I'm actually looking at the Gentleman's Edition. It is running in demo, but the only thing it won't do is save and remember things, which is no biggie here anyway. Part of the reason I'm choosing this is because it is an impressive device, and it's very much a step or two further than your average compressor. So we're adding quite a few layers of complexity, not all of which I expect you to fully understand, but we'll run through it and show how it works, why it works, and why at times a compressor such as this will do absolutely stellar duty for you. This is one of the oldest compressors in VST around. There will be older, but this one's been around for a very long time. For those of you who follow all my videos, which is all of you, of course, a few have actually asked, what is this beast here that has appeared in things? The C1L1 from Red Rock. This is an iteration of the same Molot code that is behind the Molot, or as you've seen me show it, its free version, which is the Molotok, which means baby, in a diminutive sort of a form, because it's a cut-down version of this. Let's have a quick run. Now, this is using the default sound, and it's not kind. As you hear, as I said, it's kind of not kind. Don't notice it so much in speakers, but in these things you can hear that it's starting to crunch a little bit. Molot means hammer, and so this is a compressor that's kind of famous for having a sort of a hammer-like sound, that it can really clamp down on things, and so it imparts a kind of a character. But in my experience, using the C1L1 version of this, that doesn't have to be a brutal hammer at all. It can actually be very charming in what it does. So I use C1L1 a lot on buses. That's probably where you will have seen it. Like here, I would have the C1L1. If we turn this all off, so we'll get this running. Naturally, it gets quite a lot louder because none of these are level matched. They can be, and we'll discuss that later. That's a great thing. We free up the music, and so it becomes better in many ways. But interestingly enough, even though it is brutalizing the music, it is still actually adding a character. The character's not well suited to this piece at the moment because none of the times are set right, and they're all set exactly the same, so it's kind of kludging. But it is interesting in the sense that even though it's making a mess, it's making a little bit of an attractive mess, which is probably a rather good sign. So, Tokyo Dawn, we've looked at quite a few times. This is the page without the pretty picture at the top for the full Molot GE Gentleman's Edition. Remember, there is the Molotok, which is the ungentlemanly edition, which is free. You do lose some of the more high-end functions from here. Decide which way you want to go. I think by the time you commit to wanting to learn an instrument like this, because I'm thinking that the Molot is almost more like an instrument than just a simple on-off, there you go, it's right tool. You've got to play it. So it's a thing that you're going to want to take some time to learn. Now, originally, the code came from, and I'm not going to try to say his name because chances are I'll get it wrong, but the whole thing is sort of presented in Russian. The Red Rock version is in English, but if we look at the original version, everything is in Russian. The whole thing was always rather obtuse. Those Russians. It's a great device, but you are going to need to spend your time because it does have some sophisticated and creative options in there. It's not a clone of anything in particular. It takes certain kinds of behaviors from classic type devices. Classic simply because they're old and they use the technology of the time. Doesn't make them better, but there were some beautiful things that they would do if you knew how to use them. This has picked up some of those things and moves them forward. And like I keep saying, you need to know how to use it. Quick look over it as a device. Yes, I am running the demo version. Thank you very much. I'm not going to go through every single knob button in this. It will become somewhat absurd and everything is related to everything else. But there is a lot. So we've got our obvious things of our threshold. And just like the last TDR that we looked at, everything has an active ring around it when that is relevant, which does help you to know, okay, well, that's where I want to be. And metering is, again, really superb in that you can become as broad or as detailed as you want. And you can actually click on this and it goes into a different mode, which shows you the total difference between the input and the output signal. I'll leave it on gain reduction because that's what I like to see. So threshold, ratio, from 1.1 to 1, it doesn't go 1 to 1, doesn't go to 0, and that's fair enough. I don't mind them when they go to a full 1 to 1, as in I'm doing nothing here, up to 10.9 to 1. Close to 11, but not 11. My Red Rock, the C1L1, out of the way. That goes to 11. It's more Spinal Tap. I don't think the 0.1 makes any difference anywhere. Threshold, minus 48, is sort of far enough down. You have an input which you can drive, pretty standard, plus minus 12 dB. That should be enough, 50, 60 dB. So that's the same as the Rough Rider, but we can split it between input and threshold setting. We've got our attack, our release, and then in between there are two main modes within the Molot, which is an alpha and a sigma. One of them behaves instantly, the other one has a little bit of lag, so you're more likely to get that little blip and the chop, so you get that more obviously kind of hammered sound. So you push it hard, you can just get little blips coming onto the front of things, which is terrible or charming, depends on what you want. The knee in this, now remember we talked last time about knees as in moving the transition, so that rather than just hitting our threshold and then going suddenly to exactly what the ratio says, to actually smooth that out over a period of time. The knee works a little unusually in here. It's not drawn out in any kinds of pretty pictures or anything, but it actually generally tends to work better somewhere in the middle. They explain that, and you are going to want to read the manual. It is actually a good manual as far as these things go, and of course you've got the thing which will give you some sense of what's going on. We'll leave it off for the moment because it's annoying. You've got your makeup gain. There's the option to put in saturation. You can mix wet and dry. Again, not a fan of that. You can change different compression styles. You can get into having a second stage of the attack and release. Initially baffling, but once you get how it works, it really can be quite beautiful. You can choose what kind of roll-off you are having on the sidechain being what the compressor is hearing to make the decisions on the front, nothing to do with ducking. So we're not talking about side chaining because that's a non-word. It's like saying I'm carring. No, you're driving. Ducking is what you're doing when you're using an external sidechain, or what's called a key. Here, this just rolls off, puts a high-pass filter so that you don't necessarily use the heavy low end to brutalize the soft high end, only using that as though it were a frequency meter. There is an EQ built in, and there is also a limiter built in. Some saturation, which is quite nice. It's character, but everything about this is character. And then this is really interesting. We've got an equal loudness bypass. So it doesn't much matter what we've done. It will, to a great extent, keep the bypass quite similar to what you're hearing. And wait, there's more. We can trim so that it's going to sound exactly the same. Very nice. It also has the delta function where you can just hear what we're chopping, what we're doing, the bit that we're acting on. So it's like an X-ray or an inverse of what we're doing. Very complex device for anyone who doesn't have a good grounding in compression. Let's run through the good and bads, and then we will dig into working our way through the mix and therefore showing you how the Molot behaves, some of its quirks, and therefore some of where it shines, some of where it may struggle a little, but at least in my impression through the C1L1 version of the Molot code, there's not much in which it struggles if you know how to use it. So, good and bad. It has a great feel when you know how to use it. It really does have the ability to have a great feel. There are lots of options. There is so much on board in here that it can initially be confusing. Turn those things off, work your way up until you go, wouldn't it be nice? Oh, there we go. The equal loudness stuff might take a couple of goes to get your head around, but that's beautifully done. That it's possible, not so much from the bypass here, that won't be equal loudness, but from the internal bypass, you will get a very sort of even AB, which is nice, especially if you are learning compression or learning how this compressor is going to work for you. I think it's very good value for money. €50 translates to a bit more everywhere else, but bearing in mind how much you get and how much value you can get, I don't recommend buying this until you've got a sense of how it works and how it's working for you. Otherwise, it'll probably be a waste of money. Not because it's a bad product, it's a great product. But if you don't know how to work it, you'll probably just go, that sucks, and not use it, which would be your failing. But it is the nature of this product, which of course just covers the bad. You gotta learn this one. If you come in thinking that a couple of presets and you'll be golden, you'll be CLA in a box, no, this one is really for the learning. But once you learn how to use it, based on the use that I get out of my C1L1, you will favor this compressor a lot. Maybe not for everything. You may find one or two things that you love it for, and then you'll use it for that without having to think. You'll have a situation come up in a mix and you'll be like, C1L1 or Molot. That's experience for you. So, beautiful device. We will now move through the making a mix. Here's our mix. Far too loud in my cans. We'll turn all of this compression out. Phew, that relaxes things a little. Now we will work our way through. Remember, I would normally never actually mix this way, but it makes it easy for you to see what's going on. So drums. What are we going to do to our drums? Well, let's walk through some of what will happen. Feel how that seems softer? And that's giving you that little click at the beginning. A lot of rock and roll punch comes out of that. That's why this thing's called hammer. So here, how we've got a very aggressive threshold, we're using that little pop between when the compressor should start and when it does to create that little bit of punch on the beginning. Back to our ratio right back. We've got 3 or 4 dB of, about 4.5 of compression still going. But here how that's tightened and brightened that kit. Is that the right solution for this? Don't know, but that is a very nice solution in itself. It's a different form of compression from the very heavy-handed, and the very heavy-handed we might expect. If we go back to the... Here, how that just grunts rock and roll. We let that come shorter. We start to get some of the second part of the sound come up. It's real. And that's cool. There are situations in which that's going to make a really great sound. If we're looking to push, I don't know, maybe glam or glam metal or something, then that might be a really good way of getting very tight, punchy drums, because we can push that up into the mix. Yes, we've lost a certain amount of bass, but that can either be put back in or that's going to come from your actual bass. It's going to give a very, very direct push into a mix. And that's probably heavy-handed still. That's softening it with the more straight-away kind of mode. But here how that's just got that great big rock and roll stentorian punch. You can go between the two. That's something this is great at. You can add in saturation, which is not entirely a bad idea in this situation, or you can make that dynamic. By dynamic, that's just like a dynamic EQ, which means that as the signal in that area gets louder, it starts to drop. So in this case, it's the opposite of that. As the signal gets louder, it gives you more saturation. So quieter signals will be like this, louder signals will be like this. When you've got a high enough amount of total harmonic distortion, as in this is making it sound, then it will show you here, because that means it's starting to distort. 3-5%, that's not acceptable in a hi-fi. Doesn't mean it's not going to sound great here. But you can hear, particularly on the snare, that's adding a certain something to it. You can pop that out, you don't need to have it running. Knee. Hard to hear, will more be in feel as to how it goes. Again, I would encourage you to read the manual on that, because the knee in this is part of how it gets its sound. That's mostly it. Now, in context of the music, I don't really like what I've done here. It's cool, but I don't like it in context of the music. It doesn't flow. Here's where I can use my equal loudness. If I just get rid of that. So it's just saying, okay, well, whatever we've got coming in, we'll match it going out. And that will depend on what it's hearing, so you will get different results every time. And we've just got a little bit of push overall from that. Nothing too aggressive, but it's kind of nice. I would actually like to have a little bit more coming out of this. While the equal loudness thing is really, really cool and I like it a lot, it's great for A/Bing, it will not tell you how your levels are going in the mix. So this gives me a better sense, even though these meters are very, very vague. I could tell I've lost something. That's given them more sort of cut, more well, slice through the mix is what I've ended up with there. Let's have a look at our bass. Remember, this bass is really rather long, so we've got to decide how we're going to handle it. You can hear it clicking and popping. You can generate quite a lot of distortion from this with heavy-handed work, especially as you get to very short attack times. More with the alpha. And this is a thing that compressors commonly were used for. Let's turn that sidechain off, or the EQ off on the sidechain. And it's subtle, but that's our drums and bass with no work done. And we have a certain amount of raunch happening there. The Molot, in some ways, is of quite a rock and roll kind of a feel because you can very easily get that kind of raunch coming through in sounds. So now let's look at the bus. Yes, I know. You can actually hear the little pops and pumps in that as the Sigma mode works. I mean, obviously we're far too heavy-handed at the moment. So let's back this down. So the thing I hope you hear is that we've got a little bit more raunch just sort of in the drums. They are shorter and tighter, and it's actually brought up some of that metal work, even though things are a little clipped. But that's sort of part of the thing. Normally the reverb, which is not in this mix for some unknown reason, would help smooth that off, but nonetheless it's there. The bass we've actually added a bit of plain distortion to, and a lot of sort of gruntiness. Now, as this comes in and out, hopefully you notice how the bass, the pair of them together, start to get kind of cool. And so we've now got a very definite sense of that boop, 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 boop kind of thing happening. That's what this compressor is excellent at. It's really, really cool. So happy with that. Again, none of this sounds too much on its own, but once we put them in. So let's go through again. Okay, it's great, it sounds full, but the problem we've got is that it's just kind of So let's put in the bus first, see what happens. It does help a bit, but it's really designed to work when these are on. It's that kind of controlled energy, that violence or rage about to break out that great rock and roll always has. So nice feel. It's subtle, but nice feel. Now let's see what we do with this fine fella, because I always forget to turn them on first. This is that longer section where we need to handle the phrase. Do we want that to be like the Sigma type thing? The Sigma actually works far nicer than I thought it was going to. It's giving us a very strong punch. Whether that fits in the mix, we're going to remain to see. Again, there's that strong sense of pushing it at the beginning of its phrase. Might as well give it a little bit of sparkle, seeing we can. And let's actually put that dynamic. You can actually hear that it just sort of brings her to the beginning of the sound. So it's doing some of our work for us again. That's pretty cool. Are we heavy-handed? Let's see. 1's probably about right. It's where I figured we would be, but it was worth a go. Now let's look at the MIDI cue. I think it's going to be pretty noticeable here, but it may not. Let's pop that out. We lose some presence with that, but it also settles it into the mix in some ways, which can be quite good. Let's wrap back up here. I forgot to actually test this on the drums to see what we get. Yes. Mind a little bit of that. What that's doing is just adding a boost in the mids. I think it's somewhere around 1K. It's in the manual. Might even tell us. Let's have a look. Does it tell us? How helpful are you going to be? No, thank you. I don't actually want that. Oh, yes, it's actually a complex curve. So it's got a couple of frequencies, and it changes the overall shape of the frequency curve. It's an interesting one. I, to be honest, don't really use it on the C1L1, but sometimes you get interesting results. Pulling the snare through on this is not entirely a bad thing. So that just leaves us a string in terms of the instruments that we've tracked. Remember, we need to be a lot more careful with this. So probably straight away I will get rid of the sigma, the hammer function, because that's not so good. We might even go out to a full knee. In fact, this might be a great example for the dual stage. So what that brings in is a secondary thing. This is like when you have compressors that have an extra button next to the release that says auto. What they do is they add a little gap between the beginning of the compression, so when the compressor first starts to do something, and then they work out from there how long is the compressor down. And as a result of that, they change the release rate. And when it suits the material and it's nicely done, you can get a really nice natural result that moves really well. This gives you that, but it gives you that in a way that you can set it up yourself. I will not expect to, or I would not say that I have a lot of experience in this, because it's a rare feature, and nor does the C1L1 version have this. But I spent some time with it, and I've got to say I liked the results that I got in the right situations. So let's listen to... And you can see on a ring here, not so much on that one. You can see a ring here is showing you the variation that will have. And you can actually hear it. By going shorter, it's juddering. So it allows us to set quite a long time. So it means that it will move up to 600 milliseconds on its release. Hear how that's smoothed out tremendously, even at, well, not very kind settings. Juddery and ragged. and it's smoothed out. We've still got that movement, but it's not like this, it's like this. So it undulates nicely, which is great. Let's pull our ratio back just a little kinder. I should prefer the knee out in this case. Let's flip back to Sigma just to see what happens. Yeah, we start to get more of that on-off behavior. So that riding, you notice that when it comes back in, or when it goes out, the sound becomes sort of flatter, a bit sort of papery. Once we've put that ride on, as in it's just doing this, then the sound actually, it feels more commanding, it feels more controlled, and it loses some of that papery feel. Yes, some of that is that we are crushing some of the little sparkly highs, so we're using it as a filter as well. See what happens in the mix. I quite like that. So let's just go through again. AB, our mix. Is our mix better now as a result of these compressors? Then we'll look at the mastering side. I think we may have lost a little bit of level, or at least perceived level here. We possibly haven't lost as much level here as we did in other times. While you can hear that the extra bass sort of whoomp underneath, it's a bit, well, flubby, even in these things. So what we've done, whether for right or for wrong, is we've really tightened up this mix. Maybe I've just been listening to too much Slade, but it feels that really kind of tight rock and roll sort of thing. As I say, that constrained energy. That's giving us a clarity and a punch. That kick and bass as they come together really have a very definite, which is emphasizing that groove beautifully. Now let's look at this, the master. We've heard a great big level grow, which I wonder at slightly. It's a wee bit furry, but we're also being rather heavy-handed with 15 dB of gain reduction. So it's not surprising it's a little rugged. But that is too lurchy for me for a master. Groove's probably about right. We are being far too heavy-handed, so let's back this off. The limiter we will look at here, it's not a brick wall limiter, so don't plan to use this across your master, but it is interesting. We'll go back and look at the drums with this as well. It's one of those things that I wouldn't put it across the masters, so let's go have a look at, it did turn that off, didn't I? Yes. We'll have a look at it on the drums here, your limiter. Look at our levels here. So if we want to control the peaks, we can do that. And it's not entirely a bad idea to be doing that. See, look, our level has come down here, meaning I can actually push more into here or out of here. What happens to our mix? So it's a clipper, it's just chopping things off the top. It's got its own math as to, and magic as to what it's doing on the inside, but we can then work out from there how we can use that to drive more overall. I'm going to back that right down. And because those transients are being handled here, we potentially have more flexibility across our whole mix. If we brutalize our drums here, as I started to do, the problem will be that when we get to the mix, they'll never really come through, or they will just sound on, off, and lose all nuance. That's still a bit heavy-handed as far as I'm concerned. In and outs don't seem to match. In some ways, out is nice. It's a little bit more dynamic, but bearing in mind this is the master, we want to make sure that it's all controlled. It's all very well to be super dynamic, but you can go to radio, and they're going to control those dynamics more, or more to the point, you can go to somebody's laptop speaker or whatever, any kind of system that's less than expansive, and those extra dynamics can just cause your mix to get lost. So a little bit of squish on this end is not entirely a terrible thing to be doing. We've lost a little bit of air, so we could consider what this will do. Oh, it's dynamic. That's part of why I'm not hearing it very well. Within the confines of what we've got here, that kind of solves it adequately. I would use an EQ to address that, but it works quite nicely. So the thing here with the Molot, and this is a gentleman's edition, so the extra knobs and buttons, is that you're really going to want to take your time once you've understood compression. The more you understand compression and the oddities of it, because it's not as simple as you think, everything moves. Here you've got everything moving with everything else, and you can get some very interesting results. Something I didn't touch on, but I did talk about with the Kotelnikov that this will do. We talked about the stereo interaction knob. This actually allows you to unlink those. So if I unlink this, so rather than the stereo coming in and there being a relationship between how they behave, we've now got two mono compressors, one on the left channel, one on the right channel, which means that they can be behaving completely separately from each other. So listen to this. Can you hear it kind of bouncing around? It goes away now. You can set a crossfeed. I'll get you to read the manual on that one. But quite simply, this gives you the option to either run the two together, so whatever one side's doing, the other is doing, so our compression works like this in stereo. When we unlink, as I said, two completely different subcompressors. So if we had loud signals here and not here, then they will handle each other themselves completely differently. It does mean that you can start to get a bouncing around in the stereo image. Now with care, it actually becomes a very nice little stereo widener. I can't remember where we were at back here. I know we were in the... So we've got a little bit of a sense of stereo widening. You need to be very careful with that because if you're doing any more than very subtle compression, you see here I'm using sort of half a dB. That's a very subtle movement. If we do much more than that, then it's like crazy tennis. And that can be very distressing for the listener, very distressing indeed. And you might go, but it sounds great to you, but I hear so many mixes where somebody has thought it sounds great. Everything's splashed out here and so much movement and things poking out because they chose not to put reverb on it so that their hi-hat was like stabbing you in the eye. It's striking. And I get how they kind of fell into liking it because they were focusing on how can I make everything super striking. Now everyone can hear my hi-hat pattern because I'm hammering them in the eye with it. But no, it's got to be a one thing. So one in the real world, while there will be little sounds here and little sounds there, will tend to be cohesive. We can hear things like I can hear an aeroplane going over, but collectively we hear as a whole. So a tiny bit of unlink in our stereo can give us a nice little bit of movement, but any more than that, tiniest sense of fairy dust. Tiny fairies. Like fairies crossed with pixies. But not elves. Nobody likes elves. Then we can get a little sparkle, and that can be nice. But any more than that, and you're just drawing attention to things that probably you shouldn't be drawing attention to. So if you're unsure, leave the stereo link on. But if you're open to it, try, and you're using very small amounts of compression, try unlinking them, see what happens. But get back, see if it sounds more dramatic just because it's doing that, or if it sounds more engaging as a whole piece. Because often people step back and they go, oh, my kick drum sounds better. They've ruined everything else, but their kick drum works, and that's a terrible mix. Atrocious master. Same thing with that. If your hi-hats suddenly become like, ooh, it's the hi-hat parade, you broke it. But because we've got pretty slow movement here overall and very minor amounts of compression, unlinking the stereo, bearing in mind I'm in these stupid things, is probably okay. That's basically it. It's a character compressor where you have to do the work. Again, my advice, if you don't understand compressors enough, Molot or Molotok will be difficult for you. Start with the Molotok, the free one, and really take your time until you can learn it. This is not a compressor where you want to just waggle knobs randomly. It may sort of seem that way. If you're watching me, you may think, oh, well, but you know what, I'm got some understanding of compressing. I don't claim to be the world's greatest expert on compressing. I think anyone who says that's probably fibbing, or maybe Bob Clearmountain, I don't know. I'm prepared to accept if he tells me that he's pretty good at compressing. I'm probably going to accept that from him. But, you know, most people who just make YouTube videos, oh, I'm excellent at compressing, listen to their mixes and go, that ain't Bob Clearmountain. It's largely not even CLA, who personally I think is rather heavy-handed, but his heavy-handed gushing approach to how he mixes works in its own special sort of a way. I look for a little more subtlety, but I have learned some things from how he works. But most times when people try to tell you how much they know very, very little. I know a certain amount about things, but I'm always encouraging you to step back and look at the one whole. If you do that over time, starting with Molotok, and get to the point where you're like, yeah, I grok this, you know, it's like I can speak Yoda when it comes to using this device. Then if you're enjoying that and you're like, this is great, I wish it did more, get the full Molot Gentleman's Edition, because there's a lot to be going on with. But if you rush in too early, you will die at the great gates of Kiev. You absolutely will. And that's not mentioning the war. If you have any questions about compression in general, pop them down below, preferably after hitting the subscribe yourself button. Remember, this is what I do for a living, so please don't ask me to mix by proxy. If you're looking for a professional mix engineer, as in I earn my living from this, then you know, go hire a professional mix engineer. If you're looking to learn more broadly, then I can give you some assistance or point you in good directions to move further. So, you have a great day. This has finished this little arc on compression. Our next protocol is saturation. Real saturation, not distortion, but real saturation. So we're going to have, the plan is 4 videos looking at what saturation is, and then looking at some particular saturators, how they do what they do, how they bring the magic, but not necessarily in ways that you think. I have deliberately weeded out a couple of things that were put forward, and I will move them out to character distortion reviews, just like when we looked at the Fuzz Plus and the Crush, the Bit Crusher. They're character distortions. A saturator is a very, very specific sort of a device, and we will go through all of that in the next videos. In the meantime, have a great day.